When my son married Danielle, I wore the same dark blue coat I had owned for nearly 10 years. The sleeves were a little faded at the cuffs. The lining had started to loosen near the pocket, and the hem of my long black skirt had been repaired so many times that I no longer remembered what the original stitching looked like. To anyone watching me that day, I must have looked like exactly what Danielle later believed I was: a poor widow, a tired old woman, someone with nothing left to offer and nothing left to hide. That was the impression I wanted to give, and for a while it worked perfectly. 3 days after the wedding, Danielle showed up at my front door with a lawyer. But that part of the story comes later. At the time, all I knew was that something about my son's new wife did not feel right. And if my late husband had still been alive, I knew he would have sensed it too. My name is Margaret Collins. I was 68 years old when this story began. I lived in a quiet brick house on the edge of Millbrook, a small town where people noticed everything and still somehow missed the most important things. The white paint on my porch railings had begun peeling years ago. The front step always creaked in the same place. In winter, the old heater rattled like it was angry at the cold, and the sedan parked in my driveway looked like it had survived 2 wars and was determined to survive a third. That car was one of the many things people used to judge me by. They saw an old house, an old car, an old woman, and they assumed they knew everything. What they did not know was that my husband, Robert Collins, had spent most of his life teaching me the value of appearing ordinary. Not because we were ashamed, but because Robert had learned long ago that people treat you very differently when they believe you have nothing. Robert was a careful man, a private man, the kind of man who could sit in a church pew in a wrinkled work jacket while quietly owning more than most people in town would ever see in their lifetime. For more than 30 years, he worked as a mechanic. That was the story everybody knew. He fixed engines, he repaired transmissions, he kept trucks running for farmers, teachers, mothers, and small business owners all over the county. What they did not know was that Robert had also spent decades investing carefully, building property holdings, buying land through different companies, and protecting everything behind layers of quiet, legal distance. He never bragged, never showed off, never let our son, Ethan, grow up thinking money was the center of a family's worth. Instead, Robert taught Ethan how to work with his hands, how to keep his word, how to respect people who had less, and how to recognize greed before it got close. At least he tried to teach him that. After Robert died, I began to wonder whether any of it had really taken. The funeral was held on a gray Thursday afternoon. The sky hung low and heavy, like it had been carrying grief all morning and was too exhausted to let it fall. People came in waves: neighbors from the street, old customers from the garage, women from church carrying casseroles no one had an appetite for, a few business acquaintances Robert had kept at a distance, and our son Ethan standing near the front with his shoulders stiff and his face pale, looking older than I had ever seen him. Beside him stood Danielle. She was beautiful in the polished, cold way some women are beautiful. Her hair was perfect, her makeup looked soft but expensive. Her black dress fit too well for a funeral, as if she had chosen it to be admired rather than to grieve. She held Ethan's arm with a grip that seemed gentle from a distance, but after a while I began to notice how often she adjusted her hand when someone approached, as if reminding him and everyone else that he belonged to her now. I noticed the way she looked at the room, not at the flowers, not at the pictures of Robert, not at the family members consoling one another. She looked at the people, their watches, their shoes, their posture, their reactions. She looked like she was trying to determine what could be gained from each one. That was the first warning. The second came when she reached me before the service ended and touched my arm with a smile so practiced it never quite reached her eyes. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Margaret," she said. Her voice was soft enough to sound caring, controlled enough to sound rehearsed. "Robert was such a quiet man," she continued. "He must have been very good with money." The question seemed harmless at first, but something inside me tightened. "He was good with many things," I said. Danielle smiled as though she had expected that answer. I watched her glance down at my coat, then at my shoes, then back to my face. People who think they are clever often give themselves away by the way they look at you when they believe they are above you. She thought she was looking at a poor woman, a widow with a small house and little left to protect. She had no idea that the life in front of her was only the surface of a much deeper story. After the burial, people lingered in the church hall for coffee and polite conversation. I stood near the refreshments table, holding a paper cup that had gone cold long before I took my first sip. Across the room, Ethan was speaking quietly with one of Robert's old business contacts. Danielle stayed close by his side, but she kept scanning the room the same way she had at the cemetery, as if trying to place every face into a category of usefulness. At one point, I saw her lean toward Ethan and whisper something. He gave a brief nod without looking at me. That hurt more than I expected, because Ethan had always been sensitive as a child. He used to cry when he scraped his knee. He used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them flowers for a queen. He used to sit on the kitchen floor beside Robert while he sorted tools and ask endless questions about engines, gas mileage, and why some bolts mattered more than others. He had once been a boy who asked before he took. Now he was a man who seemed to stand beside another person's will. That evening, after everyone left, I returned home alone. The house was quiet in the way that only grief can make a house quiet. The clock in the hallway ticked too loudly. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. The wind moved softly around the windows like a stranger trying the doors. I put the tea kettle on out of habit and stood in the kitchen looking at nothing. Then I reached for Robert's old cup, the one with the chipped handle he insisted on using every morning. And for a moment, I had to grip the counter because the memory of him hit me so suddenly, I thought my knees might give out. I should have been crying. I had cried plenty already, but that night I felt something else beneath the grief, a pressure, a warning. Something in Danielle's eyes would not leave me alone. 2 days after the funeral, Ethan came to visit. He arrived just after lunch, carrying a paper bag of groceries he had no business pretending to know how to shop for. He set them on the counter, gave me a short hug, and tried to act normal. Ethan had inherited Robert's broad shoulders and quiet voice, but not his patience. He had his father's intelligence, yet not the same stillness. There was always something hurried about him now, something unsettled. "Danielle said you should stop worrying so much," he told me while unpacking oranges onto the counter. "She thinks you need rest." I looked at him carefully. "And do you think that?" I asked. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Mom, you've been through a lot." That was not an answer. It was avoidance. I studied my son while he fussed with the bags and pretended not to notice. He looked tired, not in the way people look tired after work, in the way people look when they have been thinking too hard about what to believe. "She asked me about Dad's accounts," he said after a pause. I turned to him slowly. "What accounts?" "She said it was just practical. She wants to make sure everything is organized." My stomach tightened again. What exactly did she ask? He rubbed the back of his neck. Just whether there was life insurance, any properties, any outstanding bills. Stuff like that. "Did you tell her anything?" He avoided my eyes. "Not much." That answer told me enough. People do not ask casual questions about a dead man's finances unless they are interested in what that dead man left behind. I kept my face calm. Your father handled everything properly, I said. Ethan gave me a short nod. Then, after a moment, he looked around the kitchen and said, Danielle thinks maybe we should help you with some of the paperwork. I almost laughed. She had been in my life for less than a year. I was married to my son for 3 days. And already she was trying to move through the bones of my household like a woman who expected ownership. Who said I needed help? I asked. Ethan frowned a little, as if the question itself had offended him. I'm just telling you what she said. There it was, what she said. Not what he thought, not what he wanted, what she said. That was when I realized the deeper problem might not be Danielle alone. It might be my son's inability to see through her. After he left, I did something Robert once told me never to do lightly. I opened the drawer in the study where I kept the important papers. Not because I feared losing them, but because I wanted to see how quickly a man's grief could turn into appetite. Inside the folder were Robert's death certificate, the funeral receipts, some insurance documents, and the sealed envelope from his attorney, Mr. Graham Whitaker. I had not opened that envelope yet. Robert had told me to wait. You'll know when the time comes, he had said a few weeks before he died. At the time, I thought he was talking about sorrow. Now I wondered whether he meant something more. I sat at his desk, the same desk where he had balanced bills, repaired watches, and quietly planned more than anyone in town suspected, and I ran my fingers over the edge of the envelope. My husband's handwriting on the front was as firm as ever. Margaret, for your eyes only. Something in me trembled. Not fear, recognition. Robert had been preparing for something, and if he had written me a private letter, it meant he had seen something I had not yet fully understood. Still, I did not open it, not that night. That night, I listened to the house. I listened to the silence, and I waited. 3 days after the funeral, I woke to the sound of a car door outside. It was early. The sun had not yet fully burned off the morning mist. I pulled my robe on, moved to the front window, and looked out through the curtain. A black SUV was parked at the curb. My heart slowed, then tightened. Danielle stepped out first, wearing cream-colored slacks and a fitted blazer that looked far too expensive for an ordinary visit. A man in a gray suit followed her. He carried a leather briefcase. The sight of him made my stomach drop so fast I had to grip the windowsill. Danielle lifted her face toward the house and smiled. Not warmly, not nervously, like someone arriving at a scheduled meeting. My first instinct was to walk away from the window and pretend I was not home. My second was stronger. I stayed exactly where I was. And as Danielle crossed my yard with that smooth, measured confidence, I knew one thing for certain. She had not come to offer comfort. She had come for something. And by the look in her eyes, she believed I was too poor, too old, and too alone to stop her. Then she raised her hand and knocked on my door. Not once, twice, patient, certain, like she already expected me to open it. And when I saw the man beside her adjust his briefcase, I understood that whatever this was, it was bigger than a family visit. Much bigger. I took one slow breath, straightened my robe, and walked toward the door. Because if Danielle had come here with a lawyer, then the lie my family had been living under was about to be tested. And I was no longer sure whose secret would come out first. I stood in my entryway, staring through the glass panel beside the door. Danielle waited calmly on my porch. The man beside her adjusted his briefcase and glanced down at his watch. Neither of them looked uncomfortable. Neither looked uncertain. This was not a surprise visit. This was a planned visit. the kind people make when they believe they already know how the conversation will end. I unlocked the deadbolt, then the handle, then I opened the door. "Good morning, Margaret," Danielle said with a bright smile. The smile bothered me immediately. Most people who visit a grieving widow carry sympathy on their face. Danielle carried confidence. The lawyer offered a professional nod. "Mrs. Collins, my name is Daniel Price." I looked from him to Danielle. "And what exactly brings you both here so early?" Danielle exchanged a quick glance with the lawyer. The look lasted less than a second, but it told me plenty. They had rehearsed this. "We were hoping to have a conversation," she said. "About what?" "About your future." I almost laughed. 3 days ago, she became my daughter in law. Now she wanted to discuss my future. Instead, I stepped aside. "Come in." The lawyer entered first. Danielle followed. As they walked through my small living room, I noticed the same thing I had noticed at the funeral. Her eyes never stopped moving. The old couch, the bookshelves, the framed photographs, the worn rug. She was inventorying everything, judging everything, calculating value. The problem was that she was looking in all the wrong places. I invited them to sit. The lawyer placed his briefcase carefully on the coffee table. Danielle sat beside him. I remained standing. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Daniel Price opened the briefcase. My stomach tightened. He removed a folder, then another, then a stack of papers secured with clips. The sight reminded me of something Robert once told me. Never fear paperwork. Fear the people who hide behind it. "Mrs. Collins," Daniel began. "Danielle asked me to help facilitate a family discussion." "About what?" "Assets." There it was. The word. Not grief, not family, not healing. Assets. 3 days after the wedding, 5 days after the funeral. Assets. I folded my arms. What assets? Danielle leaned forward. The smile returned. "We know Robert left something behind." I looked at her calmly. Everyone leaves something behind. She laughed softly. "You know what I mean?" No, I knew exactly what she meant, but I wanted her to say it. The lawyer cleared his throat. "There appears to be some uncertainty regarding your late husband's estate." "Uncertainty for whom?" I asked. Danielle's smile faded slightly. "For everyone involved." Interesting. Everyone involved. Not family, not Ethan. Everyone involved. Already she was speaking like someone who expected ownership. The lawyer opened one of the folders. "We've done some preliminary research." That sentence caught my attention. Research. Why would a new daughter in law be researching her father in law's finances days after the funeral? Unless she had been researching them long before. "What kind of research?" I asked. Danielle answered before the lawyer could. "Public records." I remained silent. She continued. "We discovered several properties associated with companies connected to Robert." I felt my pulse slow. Not faster, slower. That was always Robert's effect on me, even after death. He had prepared for exactly this kind of person. Danielle looked encouraged by my silence. She mistook it for fear. "We just think it's important that everything be transparent." Transparent. A word greedy people love, usually when they want access to something. I sat down across from them. "What exactly are you asking for?" Daniel Price slid a paper toward me. "We're requesting a complete disclosure of estate holdings." I stared at the document, then at him, then at Danielle. "A request?" "Yes." "And if I decline?" Danielle's expression hardened for the first time, only slightly, but enough. "We'd prefer not to create conflict." There it was.
the threat hidden inside politeness. I remembered Robert saying,
When someone says they don't want conflict, pay attention. Often they're planning it. I picked up the paper. The request was broad, very broad. Bank accounts, property records, investment information, trust documentation, business ownership disclosures, everything. It was astonishing. Not because they asked, because they expected me to agree. I set the paper back down. No. Silence. The lawyer blinked. Danielle stared at me. I'm sorry, she said. No. The smile disappeared completely. Margaret, we're family. No, you're my son's wife. The room became very still. I could practically hear Danielle struggling to maintain control. We're only trying to help. Help whom? She didn't answer, because we both knew the answer. The lawyer stepped in. Mrs. Collins, misunderstandings regarding inheritance can create significant legal complications. There was that word, inheritance. Not once had Ethan mentioned inheritance. Not once. But Danielle and her lawyer had used it repeatedly. Inheritance, assets, properties, disclosure. Interesting priorities for a newlywed. I leaned back. Did Ethan send you? Danielle hesitated. Too long. The answer was obvious. No, she finally said. That told me everything. My son didn't even know she was here. The realization hurt more than I expected, because it meant this wasn't about helping Ethan. This was about helping Danielle. The lawyer tried again. Perhaps we're getting off on the wrong foot. No, I replied. I think we're getting on exactly the right foot. His expression tightened. Danielle looked irritated now. The mask was slipping. Good. People reveal themselves eventually. You just have to wait long enough. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. The more Danielle spoke, the clearer her intentions became. She knew about properties. She knew about investment accounts. She knew about company names. Not all of them, but enough to concern me. Far too much for someone who should still be writing thank you cards from her wedding. Eventually, they stood to leave. The lawyer gathered his papers. Danielle remained near the door. Before leaving, she turned toward me. The pleasant voice returned, but now I could hear the steel beneath it. I hope you'll reconsider. I won't. Her eyes narrowed. Things tend to come out eventually. There it was, the first real threat. I smiled politely. So do motives. For the first time, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. Only for a second. Then it disappeared. The lawyer opened the door. They stepped outside. Danielle paused on the porch. Robert was a very successful man. I said nothing. She continued. It would be unfortunate if certain information became difficult to explain later. Then she walked away. I watched the SUV disappear down the street. When it finally turned the corner, I locked the door. Then I locked it again. Not because I was afraid, because I was thinking. Something about the entire meeting felt wrong. Very wrong. This wasn't normal greed. It wasn't even a normal curiosity. Danielle was acting like someone chasing a specific target, as if she already knew something, or believed she knew something. I walked slowly into Robert's study. The morning sunlight stretched across his desk. The sealed envelope still sat where I had left it. For your eyes only. I stared at it for a long time. Then I finally picked it up. My hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, from instinct, because suddenly I was certain of something. Robert had seen this coming. Maybe not Danielle specifically, but someone like her. Someone who would eventually come looking. Someone who would mistake silence for weakness. Someone who would mistake simplicity for poverty. I broke the seal, opened the envelope and unfolded the first page. The moment I saw Robert's handwriting, my heart nearly stopped, because the first sentence read, "If you're reading this, someone has already started asking questions about the fortune." I stared at Robert's letter for what felt like hours. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. Not because I was weak, because the first sentence felt as if my husband had reached across death itself and spoke directly to me. If you're reading this, someone has already started asking questions about the fortune. Fortune. Even after all these years, seeing the word written plainly still felt strange. The entire town believed Robert Collins had been a hard-working mechanic, nothing more. That was exactly how he wanted it. I continued reading. "Margaret, if anyone begins showing unusual interest in our finances, do not panic. Be patient. Listen more than you speak. People reveal themselves when they think they are smarter than you." A sad smile touched my lips. That sounded exactly like Robert. Patient, observant, always 3 moves ahead. I continued. "Most importantly, tell no one about the assets. Not even Ethan unless absolutely necessary. If greed enters the family, money will only make it worse." My chest tightened. Greed had already entered the family. I knew it. And deep down, I feared Robert had known it too. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. Then I opened the second packet. This one contained financial documents, property records, business holdings, trust agreements, investment portfolios. The numbers made my head spin. Even after being married to Robert for 42 years, I still wasn't prepared for the full scale of what he had built. Millions, not thousands, millions, all legally protected, all hidden behind structures designed specifically to keep predators away. And suddenly, Danielle's behavior made perfect sense. She had smelled money. Maybe not all of it, but enough. The question was how. 3 days later, Ethan called. His voice sounded strained. "Mom, can we talk?" I knew immediately Danielle was involved. Of course. "We'd like to come by tonight. We, not him, we." I agreed anyway. At 6:30 sharp, they arrived. Danielle carried a bottle of wine, a peace offering, or a disguise. I hadn't decided which. Dinner felt uncomfortable from the moment they sat down. Every conversation eventually circled back to money. Property taxes, retirement plans, home values, inheritance laws. Danielle steered every topic there with remarkable skill. Finally, halfway through dessert, she stopped pretending. "Margaret, have you thought about downsizing?" I looked up. Downsizing? This house is awfully large for one person. I almost laughed. The house wasn't large. It was barely 1,800 square feet. But she wasn't talking about size. She was testing ownership. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Danielle was just thinking about your future." "My future seems to concern her quite a lot." An awkward silence followed. Then Danielle smiled. "Families should help each other." "There are many ways to help." "Exactly." Her eyes brightened. "We could manage things together." There it was. Manage. Not visit, not supported. Manage. The word hung in the air. I watched Ethan carefully. To my disappointment, he didn't correct her. He didn't look surprised, which meant they had discussed this before coming. My son was already drifting toward her side. That realization hurt more than I expected. The following weeks only made things worse. Danielle began appearing everywhere. At church, at family dinners, at my house. Sometimes unannounced, always curious, always asking questions. One afternoon, she stood in my kitchen examining family photographs. Robert never seemed wealthy. I kept washing dishes. He wasn't flashy. No luxury cars, no expensive vacations, no boats, no second homes, no. She turned toward me. That's unusual. I dried my hands slowly. What is? For someone who did so well, the statement froze me. I turned around. What do you mean? Danielle immediately realized her mistake. Only for a second, but I caught it. Her smile flickered, then returned. Oh, nothing. No, not nothing. Something. Something important. Because Danielle had just confirmed what I suspected. She knew Robert had money. The question was how much, and who had told her. That night, I called Robert's attorney. Samuel Whitaker had handled Robert's affairs for nearly 30 years. He answered on the second ring. Margaret? Sam, I need to ask you something. His tone changed immediately. What happened? I explained everything. The funeral, the lawyer visit, the questions, the growing pressure. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Finally, he spoke. I was afraid of this. My heart skipped. Afraid of what? Someone discovers enough information to become dangerous. Dangerous. The word settled heavily in my chest. What should I do? Keep saying nothing. That's all? For now. I wasn't satisfied, but Sam rarely spoke without reason. If Danielle knows something, he continued, she doesn't know everything. How can you be sure? Because if she knew everything, she wouldn't be asking questions. That made sense. Greedy people don't investigate what they already possess. They investigate what they're trying to find. I slept badly that night, and things became even worse 2 weeks later because Ethan showed up at my house with an announcement, one that changed everything. He looked nervous. Danielle looked thrilled. I already knew what was coming. We have news, Ethan said. I sat quietly. Danielle couldn't stop smiling. We're getting married. The words landed like a stone. Not because marriage itself surprised me, because of the timing. Robert had been gone barely 3 months. 3 months. I looked at my son. Are you sure? Danielle answered before he could. We've never been more sure. Of course she did. She always answered for him. Ethan forced a smile. We love each other. Love, perhaps, or perhaps something else. I couldn't tell anymore. The wedding was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Everything moved quickly, suspiciously quickly. And during those 6 weeks, Danielle became even more interested in Robert's finances. She asked about insurance, property deeds, investment accounts, trusts, retirement funds. Each question disguised as concern. Each question aimed at the same target: money. One evening, I found her alone in Robert's old study. She stood beside the bookshelf, looking through files. My files. She jumped when she saw me. Oh, what are you doing? I was looking for a bathroom. The lie was pathetic. The nearest bathroom was on the opposite side of the house. I stared at her. She stared back. For a brief moment, the masks disappeared, and I finally saw it clearly. The greed. Cold, patient, calculating, predatory. Then she smiled again, and the mask returned. The wedding arrived faster than I expected. The church was beautiful, small, elegant, crowded. Everyone seemed happy, everyone except me. Because as I watched Danielle walk down the aisle toward my son, a terrible feeling settled inside me. Not fear, certainty. The certainty that something bad had already begun. The ceremony ended, the reception followed. Champagne flowed, music played, people laughed, and throughout it all, Danielle never stopped watching. Watching people, watching reactions, watching opportunities. Toward the end of the evening, she approached me. Her smile was brighter than ever. We're family now. I forced a polite smile. Yes, and families should trust each other. There was that word again, trust. People who deserve trust rarely ask for it, they earn it. Danielle touched my arm gently. Everything's going to change now. Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. I looked directly into her eyes, and for the first time, I saw victory there. Not happiness, victory. Like someone who believed they had finally reached the finish line. What she didn't know was that the race had only just begun, because 3 days later, Danielle would arrive at my front door again. Only this time, she wouldn't come alone. She would bring a lawyer. And what happened next would tear my family apart. 3 days after the wedding, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house, sharp, unexpectedly. I glanced at the clock, 8:12 in the morning. Too early for neighbors, too early for visitors. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then the bell rang again, longer this time, more deliberate. I dried my hands and walked toward the front door. Something felt wrong. The same feeling I'd had at the funeral. The same feeling I'd had every time Danielle smiled while asking about money. I pulled back the curtain beside the door, and there she was, Danielle, standing on my porch. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect smile. Beside her stood a man in an expensive gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. A lawyer. My stomach tightened. Not because I was afraid, because Robert had been right. Everything he warned me about was happening. I opened the door. "Good morning, Margaret," Danielle said cheerfully. I looked at the lawyer, then at her. To what do I owe this surprise? The lawyer extended his hand. "Mrs. Collins, Daniel Harper." I ignored his hand. His smile faded slightly. Danielle didn't. We were hoping to have a conversation. "About?" the lawyer answered. "The estate." There it was. No pretending, no small talk, no fake concern. Straight to the money. I folded my arms. "The estate?" Danielle nodded. "May we come in?" Every instinct told me no, but another part of me wanted to hear exactly how far she was willing to go. I stepped aside. "Fine." They entered. The lawyer looked around the house. The old furniture, the worn curtains, the modest decorations. I could almost see the assumptions forming inside his head. Small house, old widow, little money, easy target. Danielle was making the same mistake. The problem with pretending to be poor is that sometimes people believe it. The three of us sat in the living room. The lawyer placed his briefcase on the coffee table. Then I opened it. The sound of metal clasps clicking open seemed unusually loud. Inside were documents, several of them, neatly organized, prepared in advance. This wasn't a conversation. This was an operation. Daniel removed a folder and placed it carefully in front of me. "Mrs. Collins, we're here to discuss your late husband's assets." I stared at the folder, then at him. "My husband's assets?" "Correct." Danielle leaned forward. "We just want transparency." I almost laughed. People who want transparency usually start with honesty. Danielle had started with a lawyer. "What exactly are you asking for?" Daniel slid the folder closer. "We're requesting a full disclosure of all financial holdings." I opened the folder. Property records, bank disclosures, asset declarations, investment statements. The list went on for pages. It was astonishing. Not because they existed, because they expected me to hand them over, just like that. 3 days after the wedding, 5 months after Robert's death. I closed the folder. No. The lawyer blinked. Danielle's smile weakened. "I'm sorry?" she asked. I said no. The room grew quiet. Daniel adjusted his tie. "Perhaps you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Danielle sat straighter. "Margaret, Ethan has rights." Rights to what? The lawyer answered. His father's estate. Interesting. The word slipped out before I could stop it. Danielle frowned. What? I leaned back. Ethan didn't send you, did he? Neither of them answered immediately. That was enough to answer enough. My heart sank. My son didn't even know this was happening. Danielle was acting alone, or worse, planning ahead. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mrs. Collins, we're trying to avoid unnecessary complications. I stared at him. What complications? Danielle spoke carefully. The kind that happens when information is hidden. There it was again. Hidden. She kept returning to that word because she already suspected something existed. She just couldn't prove it yet. The lawyer opened another file. We've reviewed several public records. My attention sharpened immediately. Public records. Robert's warning echoed in my mind. Listen more than you speak. People reveal themselves. So I stayed silent. Daniel continued. There appear to be several properties connected to companies associated with your husband. Danielle watched my face closely, looking for a reaction, looking for fear, looking for confirmation. I gave her nothing. The silence frustrated her. Good. People make mistakes when they're frustrated. We know Robert had more than people realized, she said. I looked directly at her. What makes you think that? She hesitated. Just for a second, but I saw it. The panic. The realization she'd almost revealed too much. I've done some research. Research. That word again. How much research? And how had she obtained it? The questions began stacking up in my mind. The lawyer pushed forward. If we don't receive cooperation, legal action may become necessary. I stared at him. Legal action? Danielle nodded. We'd rather avoid that. Of course you would. Because lawsuits attract attention, and attention exposes motives. I folded the folder shut. You came to my house. Neither spoke. You hired a lawyer. Silence. You brought legal documents. More silence. And you're threatening the court. Danielle shifted uncomfortably. I continued. 3 days after marrying my son. The words hung heavily in the room. For the first time, Danielle looked slightly embarrassed. Only slightly, but enough. The lawyer attempted to recover control. Mrs. Collins, emotions can cloud judgment. I nearly laughed. Emotions. The only emotional person in this room was me, the widow, the mother, the woman who had actually lost someone. Everyone else was discussing assets. Danielle suddenly stood. The smile returned, but this time it looked forced. We're only trying to help. No, her eyes narrowed. No, you're trying to find something. The room froze. For a moment, no one moved. Then Danielle laughed, a fake laugh, a nervous laugh, the kind people make when they feel exposed. That's ridiculous. Is it? The lawyer closed his briefcase. Clearly, he understood the meeting wasn't going well. They stood to leave, but before reaching the door, Danielle turned back, and what she said next chilled me. We know there's more, Margaret. My pulse slowed. Not sped up, slowed, because those words revealed everything. She didn't know. She suspected. There was a difference, a huge difference. I smiled politely. Then I suppose you'll have to keep looking. For the first time since arriving, Danielle looked genuinely angry. The mask slipped, just for a second, long enough for me to see the person underneath. Greedy, impatient, desperate. Then she recovered. The smile returned. The mask went back on. Have a nice day. The door closed behind them. I watched from the window as they walked toward the SUV. Neither looked happy. Good. But as the vehicle disappeared down the street, another feeling settled inside me. Not relief, concern. Because Danielle knew too much, far too much. More than a daughter in law should know, more than someone should be able to discover through casual research. Somehow she had learned enough about Robert's hidden fortune to start hunting for it, and I needed to find out how. I walked directly to Robert's study, opened the drawer, and removed the letter. Then I called Samuel Whitaker, Robert's attorney. He answered immediately. Margaret? They came. A pause. The wife? With a lawyer. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Samuel sighed heavily. I was afraid of that. I gripped the phone tighter. What aren't you telling me? The silence on the other end felt endless. Finally, he spoke, and the words that came next changed everything. Margaret, I think your daughter in law may have known about the fortune before she ever met your son. For several seconds after Samuel spoke, I couldn't say a word. I sat frozen in Robert's study, with the phone pressed tightly against my ear. What did you just say? Samuel exhaled heavily. I think there's a chance Danielle knew about Robert's wealth before she ever met Ethan. The room suddenly felt smaller. The walls seemed closer. The silence felt heavier. That's impossible. I hope you're right. Hope, not certainty. Hope. That frightened me more than anything else. Because Samuel Whitaker was not a man who speculated. For 30 years, he had protected Robert's business affairs. He was careful, deliberate, the kind of man who chose every word like it carried legal consequences. If he was worried, I had reason to be worried too. What makes you think that? I asked. A long pause followed. Then Samuel answered carefully. About 4 months before Robert died, someone began requesting public records connected to several holding companies. My stomach tightened. What kind of requests? Property ownership. I felt a chill run through me. Who made them? We don't know. The answer frustrated me immediately. Samuel continued. The requests were legal, anonymous, nothing unusual by themselves. But the timing concerns me. I stared across the room at Robert's empty chair. The chair where he used to sit every evening reading newspapers. The chair that still felt occupied even months after his death. What are you telling me, Sam? I'm telling you someone was already looking before Robert passed away. The implication landed heavily. Someone had started searching before there was an inheritance to chase, before there was a widow to pressure, before there was a wedding. Someone had already been hunting, and now that someone is married to my son. After hanging up, I sat alone for nearly an hour, thinking, remembering, replaying every interaction I'd ever had with Danielle. The funeral, the questions, the wedding, the lawyer, the constant interest in money, property, assets, inheritance. A terrible possibility began forming in my mind. What if Ethan had never been the goal? What if he had simply been the path? I hated myself for thinking about it, because no mother wants to believe her child was used, especially not by someone he loves. But the pieces were starting to fit together, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. 2 days later, Ethan called. Mom, can we talk? His voice sounded strained, almost defensive. I already knew Danielle had been talking to him. The question was how much. Of course. I'll stop by after work. When he arrived that evening, he came alone. That surprised me. Usually Danielle was attached to him like a shadow. We sat at the kitchen table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan finally broke the silence. Danielle told me about the lawyer meeting. There it was. I nodded. Did she? His jaw tightened. She said you were rude. I couldn't help smiling. The expression irritated him immediately. What's funny? The fact that she brought a lawyer to my house and somehow I'm the rude one. Ethan looked away. That was always his tell. When he knew something didn't make sense. When he didn't want to admit it. He looked away. She's trying to help. I felt a stab of disappointment. Not anger, disappointment. Because those weren't his words, they were hers. I've heard that before. He leaned forward. Mom, why are you being so difficult? The question hit harder than he realized. Difficult. After everything Robert and I had sacrificed. After decades spent building a life. After burying my husband. Now it is difficult. Because I refuse to hand over private financial information. I studied my son's face, and for a brief moment I saw the little boy he used to be. The boy who trusted me completely. The boy who ran to me after nightmares. The boy who once cried because he thought a bird outside had looked lonely. Where had he gone? Did Danielle ask you to come here? I asked. He hesitated. Too long. She was worried. Of course she was. Worried people don't hire lawyers. Hungry people do. Ethan, he looked up. Do you trust your wife? The answer came instantly. Yes. Too instantly, almost rehearsed. I nodded slowly. Do you trust me? That answer took much longer, and that hurt. The silence stretched between us, heavy, painful. Finally, he spoke. That's not fair. The words felt like a knife, because he hadn't answered. He couldn't answer, not honestly. I looked down at the table, suddenly exhausted. When your father was alive, I said quietly, he worried about this. Ethan frowned. Worried about what? People who care more about money than family. His expression hardened immediately. You think that's Danielle? I said nothing. The silence answered for me. His chair scraped against the floor. He stood abruptly. I knew it. Knew what? You've never accepted her. I almost laughed. Accepted her? I'd spent months trying. Months ignoring warning signs. Months giving her opportunities. The problem wasn't acceptance. The problem was greed. But Ethan couldn't see it, or wouldn't. That's not true. It is. His voice grew louder. Ever since we got engaged, you've looked at her like she's some kind of criminal. I stared at him. No, Ethan. The room became silent. Then what? I took a slow breath. She looks at people the way investors look at stocks. The words escaped before I could stop them. Ethan's face reddened immediately. That's ridiculous. Is it? She's my wife. There it was again. Not a defense, a label. As if being his wife automatically made her trustworthy. I stood slowly. Your father loved you more than anything. The sudden change in subject confused him. What does that have to do with anything? Everything. I walked toward the window, looking out at the fading sunlight. He spent his entire life protecting this family. Ethan remained silent. He also spent his entire life warning me about people who pretend. The room felt dangerously quiet. Then Ethan spoke, and the words that followed broke my heart. Maybe Danielle isn't the problem. I turned. He looked directly at me. Maybe you're just paranoid. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because the accusation was cruel, because it came from him, my son, my only child, the little boy I once held through fevers, the teenager I defended when nobody else would, the man whose wedding I had attended just days earlier. Now he was looking at me like I was the enemy. I realized something at that moment. Danielle hadn't just married Ethan. She had isolated him, slowly, patiently, carefully. and now he was defending her against his own mother. The conversation ended badly, worse than any conversation we'd ever had. By the time Ethan left, neither of us knew what to say anymore. I stood in the doorway watching him walk toward his car. For a second, I almost called out, almost asked him to stay, almost begged him to listen. But I didn't, because Robert had taught me something important. You cannot force people to see the truth. You can only make sure the truth is waiting when they're finally ready. As Ethan drove away, a deep sadness settled over me. Not because of Danielle, not because of the money, not even because of the lawyer, because for the first time in my life, my son had chosen someone else over me. And I feared he was about to discover exactly how expensive that choice would become. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Samuel. His voice sounded more serious than usual. Margaret, what happened? We found something. My pulse quickened. What? A pause. Then he spoke. The woman Ethan married isn't who she claims to be. For several seconds after Samuel spoke, I simply sat there. The phone felt heavy in my hand. The woman Ethan married isn't who she claims to be. The sentence echoed through my mind, again and again and again. What does that mean? I finally asked. Samuel hesitated. That worried me. Men like Samuel Whitaker didn't hesitate unless the truth was unpleasant. We hired a private investigator. I sat up straighter. When? After the lawyer showed up. A strange sense of relief washed over me. At least someone else saw the danger. At least I wasn't imagining things. What did you find? A long silence followed. Then Samuel spoke. Danielle has changed her last name twice. I frowned. People do that. Not usually before they're married. The words hit me immediately. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. Explain. 3 years ago, she was Danielle Parker. I remained silent. Before that, she was Danielle Mitchell. The room suddenly felt colder. Why? We don't know yet. I gripped the phone tighter. What else? Another pause. She also moved frequently. How frequently? 7 addresses in 8 years. That wasn't normal, not even close. Most people move once every several years, maybe twice. 7 times suggested something different, something unstable, or something deliberate. What are you telling me? I'm telling you there's a pattern. The word bothered me. Patterns usually meant repetition. Repetition meant intent. What kind of pattern? Samuel lowered his voice. The kind that makes me think Ethan wasn't her first target. My heart nearly stopped. I stood abruptly. No. I'm sorry, Margaret. No. I began pacing across Robert's study. There has to be another explanation. I hope there is. Again, with hope, not certainty. Hope. And hope wasn't enough anymore. I needed answers. After ending the call, I couldn't focus on anything. The house felt too quiet, too empty. Every room reminded me of Robert. Every photograph reminded me of what he'd spent decades protecting. Not money, family. And now that family was being threatened. The next afternoon, Samuel called again. This time he sounded even more serious. We found an old engagement announcement. I froze. Engagement? 2 years ago. The room began spinning. She was engaged before? Yes. I sat down heavily. What happened? The wedding never happened. Why not? Another silence. Then Samuel answered. The man died. I stopped breathing. For a moment, everything inside me seemed to shut down. What? The wedding was canceled after his death. A chill raced through my body. What happened to him? We're still investigating. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. Couldn't process what I was hearing. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe. But the timing felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. That night, I barely slept. I kept remembering Danielle's smile, her questions, the lawyer, the wedding, the constant obsession with money. Every memory looked different now, more dangerous, more deliberate. The next morning brought another shock. I was watering flowers near the porch when a black sedan pulled into my driveway. I didn't recognize it. A woman stepped out, mid-50s, professional, nervous. She walked toward me slowly. Mrs. Collins? Yes. My name is Laura Benson. I had never heard the name before. What can I do for you? She glanced around carefully, as if making sure nobody was listening. Then she said something that instantly sent a chill through me. We need to talk about Danielle. My pulse quickened. How do you know her? Laura swallowed hard. My brother dated her. The garden hose nearly slipped from my hand. When? About 4 years ago. I stared at her. Why are you here? Her eyes filled with sadness. Because what happened to your family happened to mine. Every alarm inside me began ringing. I turned off the water. Come inside. 10 minutes later, we sat in my kitchen. Laura wrapped both hands around a coffee mug. She looked exhausted, like someone carrying a burden for a very long time. My brother wasn't rich, she said. He owned a construction company. I listened carefully. Danielle appeared out of nowhere. My stomach tightened. Then what happened? They started dating. I already knew the answer, or at least part of it, the pattern. Samuel had called it a pattern. Now I am seeing it. Laura continued. At first, she was perfect. Of course she was. People like Danielle always were. First. Then she became interested in the business. The words felt familiar, painfully familiar. She asked questions. Again, familiar. Lots of questions. Exactly familiar. About assets, ownership, properties, money. Always money. Laura stared down at her coffee. My brother ended the relationship. I exhaled quietly. At least he had escaped, or so I thought. Then Laura looked up. He died 6 months later. The room went silent. I felt the blood drain from my face. How? Heart attack. I waited. Laura's expression told me there was more, much more. The doctors said it was natural. A pause. But she lowered her eyes. Something never felt right. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to think. Everything suddenly felt darker, more complicated, more dangerous. Eventually, Laura reached into her purse. Then she handed me a photograph. I looked down, and my breath caught. The picture showed Danielle, standing beside a man, smiling, looking happy, looking innocent. Exactly the way she looked beside Ethan. The same smile, the same pose, the same performance. I stared at the image for a long time. Then Laura handed me a second photograph. This one changed everything, because it showed Danielle standing beside yet another man. A different man, older, much wealthier looking. My heart pounded. Who is this? Laura looked directly at me. That's the man she was engaged to before he died. The room became completely silent. 3 men, 3 relationships, 3 financially successful men. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Laura stood to leave. Before reaching the door, she turned toward me, her face filled with concern. Mrs. Collins, yes? She hesitated, then spoke softly. Be careful. The warning lingered in the air long after she left. That evening, I spread the photographs across Robert's desk. 3 men, 3 relationships, 3 suspicious timelines, and now Ethan, my son. The realization hit harder than anything before, because for the first time, I wasn't just worried about money, I was worried about him. Truly worried. What if Danielle wasn't simply greedy? What if greed wasn't her worst quality? What if there was something far more dangerous hiding beneath the mask? I stared at the photographs, then at Robert's letter, then at the growing pile of evidence, and slowly, for the first time since this nightmare began, a new feeling emerged. Not fear, not grief, determination. Because if Danielle thought she was the only one capable of planning ahead, she was about to discover exactly who she had underestimated. And by the time she realized it, the trap would already be waiting. For the next week, I barely left Robert's study. The room had become command central. Photographs covered the desk, property records filled folders, notes covered yellow legal pads, and every new piece of information seemed to point toward the same conclusion. Danielle hadn't stumbled into Ethan's life. She had targeted it. The realization was painful, not because it shocked me anymore, because I was beginning to accept it. The worst part wasn't what Danielle had done. The worst part was knowing Ethan would never believe it, not yet. People trapped inside manipulation rarely see the cage they're living in, not until the door finally slams shut. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Samuel arrived carrying a thick file. He looked exhausted. That alone made me nervous. Samuel Whitaker was not easily rattled. If he looked tired, it meant something significant had happened. He sat across from me and placed the file on Robert's desk. We found more. I stared at the folder. Good news or bad news? Both. I wasn't sure I liked that answer. Samuel opened the file. Inside were dozens of pages. Financial records, public filings, background reports, private investigator notes. The deeper they dug into Danielle's past, the uglier the picture became. What exactly are we looking at? Samuel adjusted his glasses. A pattern. Again that word. Pattern. Only this time there was proof. He handed me several pages. 3 names were highlighted. The first man had owned a construction company. The second had inherited commercial real estate. The third had been the wealthy fiancée Laura told me about. All 3 relationships followed almost identical timelines. Danielle entered. The relationship accelerated. Financial questions began. Tension followed. Then the relationship ended. My stomach twisted. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Does Ethan know any of this? Samuel shook his head. No. Would he believe it? Samuel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was obvious. No, not yet. That evening, I called Ethan. He sounded distracted. Mom, we need to talk. His sigh was immediate. We already talked. No, we didn't. A long silence followed. Finally, he agreed to meet me. The next morning, we sat across from each other at a small cafe downtown. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then I slid one photograph across the table. His eyes dropped to it. What is this? A picture? I can see that. His irritation was obvious. I remained calm. Do you know who the man is? He looked again. No. That's one of Danielle's former partners. His expression changed immediately. The defensiveness appeared. The same defensiveness I'd been seeing for months. So, I slid a second photograph forward, then a third. His jaw tightened. Mom. Ethan. No. His voice became sharper. No. The reaction told me everything. He wasn't rejecting the evidence. He was rejecting the possibility. Because accepting the possibility would mean questioning his marriage. And that was something he wasn't ready to do. You hired someone to investigate my wife? The accusation hurt, but not as much as what came next. That's insane. I stared at him. Is it? Yes. People in nearby booths had begun glancing our way. Neither of us noticed or cared. You're trying to destroy my marriage. The words landed like a punch. For a moment, I couldn't speak, because suddenly I realized something. Danielle had done more than manipulate him. She had rewritten me in his mind. The woman who raised him, the woman who loved him, the woman who sacrificed everything for him. Now she was the villain, and Danielle was the victim. It was brilliant. Cruel, but brilliant. I slowly gathered the photographs. This isn't about your marriage. Then what is it about? I looked directly into his eyes. It's about protecting you. His expression softened, only for a moment. Then the wall returned. I'm not a child. No. I nodded sadly. You're a husband. The conversation ended badly, worse than the last one. By the time Ethan left the cafe, I knew something important. Reason would not save him. Evidence would not save him. Words would not save him. Only truth would, and truth required timing. After Ethan left, Samuel called. His voice sounded unusually excited. Margaret, what happened? We got lucky. I sat up straighter. How lucky? We found bank records. My pulse quickened. What kind of records? A transfer. The room suddenly felt very quiet. A transfer from whom? Samuel took a deep breath. One of Danielle's former partners. I felt my heart begin to pound. To Danielle? Yes. The amount was substantial, very substantial. Enough to raise questions, enough to attract attention, enough to suggest motive. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something shift. Not in Danielle, in the situation. Because evidence changes everything. Not suspicion, not instinct. Evidence. That evening, Samuel, Laura, and I met privately in his office. The atmosphere felt different, more focused, more determined. The investigation had finally moved beyond theory. Now we have facts, and facts could be dangerous. Laura placed several documents on the conference table. There's more. Samuel frowned. What? Laura slid forward a property report. A property purchased 6 months earlier. My eyes moved across the page, then stopped. The owner's name wasn't Danielle. It wasn't Ethan, but it was connected. Connected through a company, one that appeared in Danielle's records. The room became silent. Then Samuel smiled. Not a happy smile, a lawyer's smile. The kind that appears when a puzzle finally starts making sense. There it is. I looked at him. What? The mistake. For months, Danielle had been careful, patient, calculated. But nobody is perfect. Eventually, everyone leaves fingerprints. And Danielle had just left hers. The next few days passed quickly. Investigators gathered more evidence. Records were verified. Connections were confirmed. Every new discovery strengthened the case. But I wasn't interested in revenge. Not really. I wanted Ethan back. That was the truth. Money didn't matter. Properties didn't matter. The fortune didn't matter. Not compared to my son. The problem was that Ethan couldn't see what was happening. Not yet. And until he did, nothing would change. 3 days later, an opportunity arrived. Unexpectedly. Perfect. The local Chamber of Commerce announced its annual charity gala, one of the largest events in the county. Business owners, lawyers, bankers, investors, community leaders. Everyone would be there, including Ethan, including Danielle. And thanks to some old relationships Robert had spent decades building, I would be there too. Samuel looked at me across his desk. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? I slowly smiled. For the first time in months. Probably. Laura laughed softly. Samuel closed the file, then leaned back. Good. I folded my hands, because suddenly the path forward felt clear. Danielle had spent months manipulating conversations in private. Now the truth would meet her in public, where she couldn't control the narrative, where she couldn't isolate Ethan, where she couldn't hide behind excuses. The trap was finally ready, and all that remained was waiting for her to step into it. What none of us knew was that Danielle had plans of her own, and before the gala arrived, she would make one final move. A move so reckless, so desperate, that it would expose everything. The week before the gala, I learned something important. Greedy people become careless when they believe they've already won. Danielle believed she had won. That confidence became her greatest weakness. 2 days before the charity gala, she made her move. I was sitting on my porch reading when a courier arrived. The man handed me a large envelope. No return address, no explanation, just my name written across the front. The moment I opened it, my stomach tightened. Inside was a legal notice. Danielle had filed a petition demanding access to information related to Robert's estate. The document wasn't strong enough to win. Samuel confirmed that immediately. But that wasn't the point. The point was intimidation, pressure, control. She wanted to scare me scared. She wanted me isolated. Most importantly, she wanted me to react. I smiled, because for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was waiting, and waiting can be far more dangerous. That evening, Samuel reviewed the filing in his office. Laura sat beside him. Both looked amused. She's panicking, Samuel said. Why? Because she knows she's running out of time. I leaned forward. What makes you think that? He tapped the documents. People who are winning don't take reckless legal swings. That made sense. Danielle had spent months pretending to be patient, months pretending to be strategic. Now she was rushing, and rushed people make mistakes. The following evening, the final investigative report arrived. Samuel opened it first. Then he slowly smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a happy smile, a devastating smile. The kind lawyers save for moments when facts become impossible to argue against. What is it? I asked. He slid the report across the desk. There it is. The missing piece. The document connected everything: the former relationships, the financial transfers, the shell companies, the property purchases, the timeline, everything. For months, Danielle had hidden behind coincidence. Now coincidence was gone. Only evidence remained. Laura covered her mouth. Oh my God. Samuel nodded. Exactly. I stared at the report, then at Robert's photograph sitting on the bookshelf. My husband had spent 40 years protecting our family. Now, even after death, he was still protecting it. The gala arrived on the Saturday evening. The event was held at the Grand Savannah Ballroom, one of the most prestigious venues in the county. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Soft music drifted through the room. Hundreds of guests filled the ballroom. Business owners, community leaders, attorneys, investors, bank executives, people Robert had quietly worked beside for decades. Most never realized who he truly was, or how much influence he carried. That was exactly how he preferred it. I arrived wearing a simple navy blue dress. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive looking. The same strategy Robert and I had used our entire lives. Appears ordinary. Let others reveal themselves. As I entered the ballroom, I immediately spotted Ethan and Danielle. She looked stunning, elegant, confident, victorious. The expression on her face told me everything. She believed the future belonged to her. She had no idea what was about to happen. Ethan noticed me first. A complicated look crossed his face: guilt, love, confusion, all mixed together. I smiled warmly. He smiled back. For a brief moment, I saw my son again. Then Danielle appeared beside him. The wall went back up. The evening continued. Cocktails, dinner, speeches, awards, conversations. Everything appeared normal. Then came the announcement. The ballroom lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage. The master of ceremonies stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, the room grew quiet. We have a special recognition this evening. Danielle barely looked up. She was too busy speaking with a local attorney. The irony almost made me laugh. The presenter continued. Tonight we honor a man whose contributions helped shape this community for decades. A photograph appeared on the giant screen. Robert, my husband. The entire room applauded. For a moment, emotion tightened my throat. I wasn't prepared for that. The presenter smiled. Although Robert Collins is no longer with us, his legacy remains one of the most extraordinary success stories in our region. Danielle froze. The smile disappeared from her face. I noticed immediately. Good. The presenter continued. Many people knew Robert as a mechanic. Soft laughter spread through the audience. Few knew he quietly built one of the largest privately held investment portfolios in the county. The room exploded with surprise. Murmurs echoed everywhere. Heads turned, whispers spread. Danielle's face turned pale. For the first time, she wasn't controlling the narrative. The narrative was controlling her. I looked toward Ethan. His eyes were wide, completely stunned. The presenter smiled again. Even fewer knew that Robert's fortune funded scholarships, hospitals, churches, veterans programs, and dozens of community projects. The room erupted into applause. People stood. Some cheered. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Then came the moment everything changed. The presenter looked toward my table. Would Margaret Collins please join us on stage? The spotlight found me. The entire ballroom turned. Every face, every eye, every whisper focused on me. I stood slowly. Danielle looked horrified, absolutely horrified. And for the first time since this began, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not an annoyance, not frustration. Fear. I walked calmly toward the stage. The applause continued. As I reached the microphone, the presenter smiled. Then he handed me a sealed folder. The same folder Samuel had prepared. The same folder containing every piece of evidence, every record, every transfer, every lie, every connection, everything. I looked down at it, then across the ballroom, straight at Danielle. She immediately knew. Somehow she knew, because all the color drained from her face. Beside her, Ethan looked completely confused. The ballroom remained silent, waiting, watching, listening. I slowly opened the folder, then looked directly into the microphone and spoke 7 words that changed everything. There's something everyone deserves to know. The ballroom was completely silent. Hundreds of people sat frozen in their seats, waiting, watching, listening. I stood beneath the spotlight holding the folder Samuel had prepared. For months, Danielle had controlled every conversation, every accusation, every narrative. Now she could do nothing except watch, and for the first time since Robert died, I felt completely calm. Not because I wanted revenge, because the truth no longer needed protection. It was ready to stand on its own. I looked across the room, straight at Danielle. Her face had gone pale. Beside her, Ethan looked confused, concerned, uneasy. The confidence both of them carried when they entered the ballroom was gone, especially hers. I leaned toward the microphone. There's something everyone deserves to know. The room remained silent. Even the wait staff had stopped moving. I opened the folder, then carefully removed the first document. My husband Robert spent 40 years building a life most people never understood. The giant screen behind me displayed a photograph of Robert, young, smiling, standing beside the small garage where everything began. A wave of emotion passed through the audience. I continued. He never cared about wealth. Several people nodded. They knew it was true. Robert cared about character. More silence, more attention, more focus. Then I took a slow breath. And before he died, he left me one instruction. The audience leaned in. I could feel it. They reveal themselves eventually. I looked directly at Danielle. The room followed my gaze. Every head turned toward her. For the first time all evening, she looked trapped. Good. Because she was. I lifted another document. For months, someone has been attempting to gain access to my husband's assets. Murmurs spread throughout the ballroom. I continued. That person hired attorneys. More whispers. Investigated private records. The whispers grew louder and attempted to pressure a grieving widow. Now people were openly exchanging looks. Danielle shifted uncomfortably. The walls were closing in. I could see it. Then I revealed the first piece of evidence, a photograph. The giant screen displayed it immediately. Danielle standing beside another wealthy man. Gasps filled the room. Danielle's eyes widened. Beside her, Ethan stared at the screen, confused. Then I was shocked. Then I was concerned. I displayed the second photograph. Another wealthy man, another relationship, more whispers, more reactions. The ballroom was beginning to understand. Then came the third photograph. The room erupted, not loudly, but emotionally. The collective reaction rolled through the crowd like a wave. People understood patterns, and suddenly everyone could see one. I looked toward Ethan. His face had gone completely white. The realization was beginning. Slowly, painfully, but it was beginning. Then I spoke the words that changed everything. The men in these photographs all shared one thing in common. The audience waited. They were financially successful. Silence. Then I added, and every relationship followed the same pattern. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I continued carefully. Rapid commitment. Pause. Questions about money. Pause. Attempts to gain access to assets. Pause. Then conflict. The room felt frozen. I could hear my own heartbeat. Danielle suddenly stood. This is ridiculous. The sharpness of her voice startled several people. For months, she had hidden behind smiles. Now anger had taken over. Good. Angry people reveal themselves. I looked at her calmly. Would you like me to continue? Her face reddened. She remained standing, but she said nothing because she knew. She knew what was coming next. The financial transfers, the investigation, the records, the connections, everything. Samuel rose from a nearby table, then walked toward the stage. The audience immediately recognized him. One of the most respected attorneys in the county. That mattered a lot. He approached the microphone, then calmly explained the investigation, the timelines, the property purchases, the corporate records, the financial links. No accusations, just facts. Cold, precise, undeniable. Every sentence pushed Danielle deeper into the corner she had created herself. Then came the final document, the one that connected everything. The room exploded with shock. Several people literally stood from their seats. Others covered their mouths. One woman began crying, not because of money, because the betrayal had become impossible to deny. I looked toward Ethan. My heart broke. because he finally saw it. The truth, the manipulation, the lies, the months of deception, all of it. He slowly turned toward Danielle. His eyes searched her face desperately, hoping she would explain, hoping she would deny it, hoping she would save what remained of his marriage. Instead, she looked away. That was the moment everything ended. Not when the evidence appeared, not when the audience reacted, when she looked away. Because innocent people look for answers, guilty people look for exits. The ballroom remained silent as Danielle grabbed her purse. Then she headed toward the exit. Nobody stopped her, nobody spoke, nobody followed. The crowd simply watched her leave, alone. The large doors closed behind her, and just like that, she was gone. The silence afterward felt enormous. I looked at my son. He looked shattered, completely shattered. For a moment, I forgot about the audience, forgot about the gala, forgot about the fortune. All I saw was my child, the same little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, the same boy who cried when birds looked lonely, the same boy who had made a terrible mistake. Ethan slowly stood, his eyes filled with tears. Then he walked toward the stage. Every step seemed heavier than the last. When he finally reached me, he couldn't speak, not immediately. The entire ballroom watched, waiting. Finally, his voice broke. Mom. One word. That was all it took. Years of love, months of pain, a lifetime of memories, all inside one word. Tears rolled down his face. Real tears. The kind that comes when pride finally loses. I'm sorry. The room became silent again. Not uncomfortable silence, emotional silence. The kind people feel when they're witnessing something real. I stepped forward, placed my hand on his cheek, and smiled. Not because he was perfect, because he was my son. There you are. His face crumpled. The tears came harder. Then he hugged me. The audience began applauding. Slowly at first, then louder still. People stood one by one until the entire ballroom was standing. Not for the fortune, not for the investigation, for forgiveness, for my family, for second chances. After several minutes, the applause finally settled. Ethan and I sat together backstage. Neither of us spoke for a while. Eventually, he looked at me. Did Dad know? I smiled softly, more than either of us realized. Ethan laughed through tears. That sounded exactly like Robert. We sat quietly, thinking about him, missing him, honoring him. Then Ethan asked the question that mattered most. What happens now? I looked toward the ballroom, toward the people Robert had helped for decades, toward the legacy he left behind. Then I smiled. Now we protect what your father built. Months later, Ethan joined the charitable foundation Robert had secretly funded for years. The scholarships expanded. The veterans programs grew. The hospital donations increased. And for the first time in a very long while, our family began healing. Not because we recovered the money, because we recovered from each other. People often assume this story is about wealth. It isn't. Money was never the point. The point was trust, character, family, and the lesson Robert spent his entire life teaching us. The people who truly love you don't care what you own. The people who only care about what you own eventually reveal who they really are. Sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes years, but eventually they reveal themselves. And when they do, the truth becomes the most valuable inheritance of all. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe and join our community. Stories like these remind us that true wealth isn't measured by money, property, or status. It's measured by the people who stand beside us when life gets difficult. Have you ever been judged because of your appearance, your age, or what people assumed about your finances? Share your experience in the comments below. I read as many comments as I can, and your story may encourage someone else who needs to hear it. And remember, the people who truly love you never ask what you own before deciding how much you're worth. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.